Okay, so I want to cover three things quickly, politics and then infrastructure and the future of water. I'm going to let the experts at our 11:30 session really dig into it. I'm going to cover water from one of the public markets companies. But we were just on that previous call asked about the events of last week, and does that affect money flowing into where capital is going to flow? And clearly last week was a dark week for the U.S. We have not seen something like that in our lifetimes, but we've had other dark times as a nation. And just to give you a sense of how people view the markets, in 1942, 43 and 44, while the World War II the outcome was clearly highly uncertain. The markets was up 20%, almost 26%, and 19% in those 3 years. So the market looks through a lot of the challenges. So don't be surprised if, with all the negative stuff going on, that the markets continue to do well in the environment we're in, for a lot of the reasons that Arnold Schmeidler highlighted last week, which is we don't see inflation being an issue. We see interest rates staying low, which makes valuations more attractive, and corporate profits are going to be quite strong this year. So we're not negative on the markets themselves, but clearly last week was a black mark for our nation. I want to highlight, because there's been a lot of discussion about the Georgia election and what's going on, comments from Democratic Senator Joe Manchin that really highlight that it's not necessarily 50-50 and everyone's going to go along party lines, or that because the Democrats swept, that you're going to see a wave fully to the progressive side of the party. There are a lot of moderates in both parties, and I think what you've seen so far from Senator Manchin, where he's already made a statement on whether we're going to do the 2000 or not and how that horse trading works. I think what you are going to see is maybe a little bit more moderation in terms of the parties and how they play this out. But be clear, it's not necessarily the Democrats won and they're going to get whatever they want, even with the Democrats inside their own party. So I also wanted to just share how the markets have returned under a divided or united government. And there have been 7 periods of divided where the returns have averaged about 60%, which is really around a 9% annual return. The Democrat periods, it's averaged about 56%, where the Democrats have had full control, and the Republicans 35, although the years are shorter. I would just say that consistent with what we've seen in the past, under Democratic administrations, we've had about 10.5% returns. With Republicans, you've had about just under 7. So we're going to expect to see potential for strong market returns, regardless of how governments are set up. So switching gears and getting into the infrastructure, and Arnold had touched on this last week. It's something that Sean touched on 2 months ago. But clearly we have a major problem for infrastructure, and it's a big part of the Biden agenda. And just as it gets to the water opportunity, the expectations of how the Biden administration will operate, first move will be to get stimulus to help people after the current benefits end up. And then that should be around March. You'd start to see a new plan. And then in July would probably be the infrastructure plan. And what I want to highlight here is we have a big gap in terms of the cost to improve this. We're about 1.6 trillion short of the 4.6 trillion we needed in 2017. But let me just highlight drinking water with a solid D in its grade, and then wastewater with a D+. Those are not the numbers we need as one of the leading nations in the world in terms of the quality of our infrastructure here. I'll just jump back here. The gap again, you can see water and water infrastructure, 105 billion. What is interesting in the preliminary proposals from the Biden administration, it's expected that about $100 billion will be allocated to water. We're not that far removed from the Flint issues and other issues, but we have real problems in our infrastructure here, and water is one of the main ones. And the costs are high on drinking water. We have in New York City, the sewage pipes are 200 years old. Some of them are wooden, and we have 250,000 water main breaks a year. We're wasting way too much of something we have precious needs for. There are three big issues with the water scarcity that we're facing around the world, and I'm not going to get into all the numbers because the group behind me will do a much better job, but we have lack of sufficient infrastructure, which we just highlighted, but population growth is growing at a pretty alarming rate. By 2030, we should be at 8 billion, and in 30 years, we should be at 10 billion people here, and then you add to it the climate change issues, so those are the big issues leading to water scarcity. In the U.S., we have a number of publicly traded companies. It has been a very difficult area for public market equity guys to invest in. Xylem is one of the leaders. Xylem was developed in 2011. It came out of the spin-up, the breakup of ITT. It had a slow start after the breakup. They really focus on three areas: water infrastructure, applied water, and management and control solutions, which is really the introduction and advanced developments of artificial intelligence and other technological solutions to make better use of our water resources. But what Xylem's doing is rolling up some of these other companies. But to just give you a sense why this is a tough area to invest in, with just under $20 billion market cap, they're going to do about $500 billion in revenues. In net income. They're going to do about $5 billion in revenues, but their multiple is about 86 this year. They were going to do earnings of about 1.25. I'm targeting to go to under 250 next year. So the multiple will drop to a reasonable 40% multiple on this. But it just shows you where scarce resources are and why this is a bit of a challenging area to invest in the markets, even though we know there are great opportunities here. Their long-term growth rates are about 10%, so pretty healthy in a low-growth environment. But the big part of their business is coming out of the utilities, and that's going to be a strain on the system, depending on how utilities are able to pass on rate hikes to make the transitions that they have to make to deal with the greening of our country. So really interesting companies, but tough valuations right now, a lot of roll-up opportunities, and I think you'll see continued consolidation in the water area. So with that, I'm going to stop and see if we have any questions or if we want to move on.
I'm sure we've got questions. I know we'll hit some of these water related in the next hour. Any questions on that or otherwise?
Well, it's Duncan. I might just, I think one of the things we were talking about is, and we'll get into this, is there isn't a clear, obvious pathway for a lot of people to make water investments. You might look at a company like Xylem or people like them as a potential exit for things. Maybe, Stephen, could you talk about that a little bit? Because they have been acquisitive.
Yeah, and I think one of the big themes for us is continued roll-ups and divestitures of businesses that are not getting the growth or the attention that they need where they are. That's why Xylem was actually started, because it was scarce resource allocation issues across the three business lines of IT&T were leading to underinvestment for them. So I think you're going to see a company like Xylem continue to be a place where a lot of the private money looks to sell out to as they move forward. So I think you'll see more roll-ups and more merger and acquisition activity here. And I think this is going to be a big push for a lot of the private guys to look to companies like Xylem that are acquisitive in helping make this big transition that has to go on around this climate issues, and particularly around water, because the water scarcity issues are, for all the progress that we've made, and there's been some really phenomenal progress in getting water in good water to the people that need it, and managing wastewater, particularly in some of the developing areas. We have a long way to go, but in the more developed markets, it's still going to be a big opportunity and something we need to continue to look at. You just have to get the right valuations for it.
So Steve, the question about the whole utility issue and rate hikes and so on and so forth. I mean, I think you've seen it in renewables. I mean, California, case in point, right, where certain standards have been imposed, if you will, and utilities are compelled to sign power purchase agreements with renewable energy and the like, and inevitably that rolls through into the rate base. So do you see that happening in the water space, or are the mandates so squishy that it's not likely to happen?
I think the utilities are in a tough spot, because to do it, to make the investments they need to make for the greening of our country, they're going to need rate hikes. And who are they putting the rate hikes on? It's on a system that really isn't in a good position to take additional costs. So there's going to have to be some subsidization going on in the early stages till we get to a broader recovery for the economy, because too many of the people that would have to pay the hikes can't afford it right now.
Thanks.
Other comments, questions? Anyone notice my wardrobe change? My Denison sweatshirt?
You are one talented man.
You have no idea what I did in 5 minutes. Okay.
Hey, Stephen. Oh, I'm sorry.
No, you're good. You're good, Bob.
Yeah, one quick one. Regardless of sort of the divided government, do you think that there's the potential that there could be enough rallying around the Biden agenda for infrastructure and green tech spending that there would be enough money such that the way to think about it is perhaps to chase the policy objectives and not look too deeply at the, sort of basic fundamentals of the area? Does that make sense at all?
From an investment perspective?
Yeah.
Yeah, clearly Xylem with an 86 multiple was up 30 some odd percent in the last 12 months. So people are chasing scarce opportunities, and that pushes up the bid. But at some point you are paying for the future earnings, right? So that's where it gets to be a bit of a dilemma. I will say, and we've talked about this in Duncan, it came up in our prep for the water discussion, is, we've talked about infrastructure spending as a nation, as an industry, till we're blue in the face, and very little has happened. But it really does feel like we're at a point where it is no longer postponable, and it is one of the areas that the parties can agree on. So $1 billion program can be done this year, and I think there's a high probability that they'll do something in that area. And I think there will be some companies that you're going to have to hold your nose and buy, regardless of the multiples. So it's going to be a challenge in that area, and I do take a different approach. I believe that there are shovel ready things to do. They're not the traditional ones, and getting our broadband infrastructure was one, but getting some of the water things we need to do done is really a no-brainer. And there are things that you can get done pretty quickly if you had the right area of emphasis. And we would actually think the government should split the budget to an investment budget where they're actually gauging the success of these projects and putting more money to the successful ones and taking money away from the ones that fail, and a maintenance budget. And if we did that, we'd be in a much better shape as a country to avoid the politics of disrupting projects and really focus on the returns as if you're running a business, the way you would make CapEx investments. There's no reason the government can't operate better that way. Not that they would act like a business, but they could start to do something in the way.
So it's 11:30 just passed, and Vijay, I saw your hand up, but maybe you can hold it. We want to allow the water group to take over. It's been a lot of great content to come. Yeah. And but I take your point, Steve, on that one. I think that should be one of the things that we maybe put our shoulder behind. Be a good initiative. So I guess the person is Tom.
Yeah, I'll take it over if you want. Sure. I'm not going to do a long preamble because I want to get into what are really four incredibly talented and inspiring and passionate speakers about all things water. So we've got four. The way we're going to run this is each one's going to spend 10, 12 minutes in their specific area of expertise. And then we'll have a Q&A at the end. And we want that to be rich and interactive amongst the group and amongst the panelists. That's where we'll kind of get the best outcomes. So the first speaker is Will Sarney. And I met Will about 6 years ago, I think, at an innovation conference where we started sharing bold ambitions and ideas on how to solve local and global water challenges. And he's made a lot more progress than I. Nonetheless, we're really fortunate to have him here today. He's recognized globally as one of the most preeminent thought leaders on water strategy and water innovation. He's a founder of the Water Foundry, where he's the presiding CEO, and they provide business strategy and technology solutions to Fortune 100 companies as well as emerging startups. He's an absolutely prolific author of books, white papers, articles on anything you want to know about water, and then some. He's probably one of the most coveted speakers on water strategies in the globe, and speaks at various conferences. He's on a lot of different boards that support kind of water advocacy, and an active investor in a variety of tech startups. So a great guy, and I think that's the most important thing. He's just a human being who's committed to finding water solutions for companies, communities, and consumers. So, Will, I'll let you take it from there.
Well, Tom, I think we should just end it there. I mean, I doubt that I could do any better than you did. So thanks for the kind words.
Well, just the point. That's the same person who was introduced about a month ago. Rishad Tabakawala said exactly the same thing. I want to be introduced by Tom Jones.
I love it. So, yeah, I'm prolific, which means I have no social life. But I do like to write, a bit of an evangelist. So thanks for the opportunity. I will do my very best to stay on time. If we can go to the first slide, I'll dive in, so to speak.
The next one. No, next one.
Oh, here we go. Okay. Undoubtedly one of my favorite quotes. And I use it as a sort of guiding light, if you will, in that I really do look for signals. Basically, where is the future here and now, and use that as a way to identify trends. And I follow those trends. And where I sit in the world of water is working with U.S., non-U.S. multinationals across a range of sectors, and then water technology startups and early growth stage companies. And I'll show you the areas that I focus on. Certain things I'm really not making a priority. We talked about utilities. Don't spend a lot of time working with utilities except for technology companies that service utilities. I don't have the patience for it, quite candidly. So I like the private sector, investing, and the startup world. Next slide, please. So why water? This is a projection under business as usual conditions of how much water we need. So we need roughly about 60% more water for agriculture, 80% more for thermal electric power production. So if we're into renewables, low water footprint or no water footprint, and then roughly about 55% more water for a variety of other purposes, including drinking water, by 2050. So this is commonly referred to as the energy water food nexus, creates a lot of stress, but also drives innovation in both the public sector, which is slow, private sector fast, and in the entrepreneurial and investor world. Next slide. why worry? It's a little sort of Alfred E. Newman, but water is over-allocated and undervalued. We talked about pricing a little bit earlier, but I'd really like everyone to think about the value of water, not just the price of water. It's over-allocated. I live in Denver. The Colorado River Basin is wildly over-allocated, poorly governed, public policy failure, non-circular and nexus stress, which I talked about. I'll talk about circular a little bit later. And then the impacts of climate change, which makes everything worse. Next slide. So for me, this is what I focus on: digital, decentralized, democratized, and circular. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about circular. I'm going to spend a lot of time talking about the first three and where I see some of the big trends from usual suspects and non-usual suspects, if you will, in terms of corporates that are looking at the startup world, doing roll-ups. The Xylem example was excellent and completely agree. Next slide. So Tom and I met when I was involved with 2016 X Prize, sponsored by Clorox Brita, designed to solve Flint. One of the things I learned is that X Prize, Singularity University, Peter Diamandis talks about exponential technologies as a way to create abundance. Highly recommend looking at some of his work. So for me, what I focus on are exponential technologies, mostly on the digital side. And we'll get into a few examples. And then also advances in material science. So nanotechnology, ceramics, things like that. And here are just 4 companies that sort of fit in the buckets of digital: Jibe satellite data acquisition and analytics for real-time water quality monitoring, Pluto Shift AI for industrial applications, Helix ceramic membrane technology company, and Source, formerly known as Zero Mass Water, which is an air moisture capture technology company. Next slide. So digital technologies, this is a piece of work that I worked on, I co-authored when I was at Deloitte. You know, if you think about value creation with respect to digital, it really falls into this technology value loop. I've added people and process because digital technologies don't do terribly well if you don't have a workforce on board. So it's about capturing data, transmitting data, aggregating, analyzing, pushing, and taking action, either reactive or proactive. So it's a convenient way to think about how do you create value from this value loop, and where does your technology or business sit in the equation here. Next slide. Digital value chain, this is a fairly convenient way to think about what's going on in the world of digital for both water, wastewater utilities, and industrial applications. So think about digital applications in the watershed, supply chain, in operations, whether it's a utility or whether it's a food and beverage company, and then engaging with customers and consumers, including things like smart homes. And again, you know, a couple of satellite data acquisition companies on the left. Cloud Discrete does flood prediction work, Utilis, leak detection for utilities. I showed you Pluto Shift. But then interesting technology companies in the smart home and utility sector on the right. Next slide. So democratized, a lot of really interesting things going on in the world of delivering hydration solutions in different ways. So if you look at companies like Pepsi, Coca-Cola, Nestle, and others, they really do have a strategy to move away from the bottle. You know, the PET bottle is problematic for a number of reasons. So what are they looking at? They're looking at alternative hydration technologies. 2 companies on the left are water kiosks, in-stream water startup, Flow Water, growth stage company, basically replacing the water fountain. which is officially dead after the pandemic. SodaStream, an Israeli startup, was purchased by PepsiCo a couple of years ago, both in-home and outside the home technology solutions. Bevi has done pretty well in the marketplace, and they provide not just hydration, but personalized solutions, flavored water, carbonated water, chilled, still, whatever it may be. Roshan's really interesting. Startup company that just a few weeks ago was acquired by Pentair. And this is a in-home countertop system that will deliver flavored water using pods, sort of like a Keurig. Rebo, company on the right, Smart Bottle. So the ability to collect data on how you're hydrating, and if you think about how important home exercise is and home hydration, that's something to watch in my view. Next slide. I know John and Robinson, friend and colleague, is going to talk about at least one or two of these companies here, but I'll get into a feel for what's going on in the smart home world, which I think is really interesting. So Spout, upper left, real-time lead testing at the tap. A startup came out of a program called 10-10-10, and also the AB InBev 100+ Accelerator. Tap Water, Spanish company. It's a smart filter that you put on your tap. Flow Water sells that in the U.S. Conservation Labs, leak detection technology company, really strong team, really interesting success story. And Moen, the fixture company, recently, well, not too recently, acquired Flow, which also monitors water flow and leak detection. Hydroloop, upper right, startup technology company, won an award at the Consumer Electronics Show, basically recycling water so you can reduce the amount of water that's coming into your home. So, and then Ratio, Denver-based company, it's all about smart irrigation. So what you can see here is that essentially what's happened in the world of energy is now happening in the world of water, where you can monitor water quality, water quantity, recycling water, smart irrigation, and then also leak detection, which obviously is important for anyone that lives in an apartment, condo, or home, but also for the insurance sector. Next slide. Circular. Basically think about utilities as factories, essentially, where you can reuse the water for potable, non-potable use, agriculture, manufacturing. You can take the sludge and use it for a variety of different purposes, including nutrients, things like that. So really rethinking going from a linear use of water and byproducts to really reusing that over and over again. Europeans refer to this as circular economy. Here in the U.S., we refer to it as One Water. Next slide. That's the ending, and we actually missed one slide somewhere in here. We actually missed two slides. So when you think about, no, Tom, stay with this one for a minute. If you think about where innovation comes from, I mentioned that my world is mostly on the corporate side and startups. Well, you're seeing some really interesting partnerships. The Nature Conservancy partnering with Techstars for their sustainability program. This was the last cohort that they ran. They'll run it again this year. They had 5 water companies out of 10 in the cohort. Really interesting. Jibe, I mentioned before. AB InBev started the 100+ Accelerator. They are open again for another cohort. They're going to have at least one more multinational on board to scale the program. And in the first 2 cohorts, they had at least 5 water technology companies, including Spout, part of that, Jibe, desalinator, solar-powered desal. And then Microsoft, really interesting company in terms of what they've done with AI for Earth. They have $1 billion climate fund. Included in that is a water focus area for investment, and they also are an LP in investor group Emerald, along with Ecolab. So sort of the usual suspects have changed a bit in terms of the corporate world spending more time on identifying and nurturing startups and making direct investments, and really, also piloting them so they can scale pretty significantly. So one thing I did leave out because we didn't get to the slide is looking at localized treatment and off-grid water supply. So I had Organica is a company to look at, and also Source, formerly known as Zero Mass Water. Source just got a $50 million C round investment. That's the slide. Encourage you to take a look at both of those companies. So anyway, that's kind of where I play in the world of water. Some of these companies I've invested in, some advisors, and some I just track because I want to see how they do. So thanks.
Well, that's great. I would also mention, your website is an incredible resource for anybody interested in water, from video cast to white papers and all sorts of unbelievable content. So for those of you who are interested. So hopefully you can hang out and be part of kind of the Q&A session at the end. And I'll turn it over to, I think, Duncan, right?
Thanks, Will. Appreciate your comments and your participation today. Next up, I'd like to introduce Eli Greenberg. He's a principal at Greenbacker Labs. Greenbacker Labs is an early-stage sustainable infrastructure investor that makes corporate investments and provides project finance to scalable businesses focusing on renewable energy and water. Eli's formal education and accreditation is in engineering, specializing in water, wastewater infrastructure, and it led him into two water-related startups. He also served as a Peace Corps volunteer in Honduras, building water systems. Eli, we're thrilled to have you with us today. Zoom is yours.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the invitation to be here. It's great to chat with everyone. I think we can flip over to my slides if possible. I can go to the next slide. Just introducing myself. So just a quick word about where I'm coming from right now out of Greenbacker. As Duncan said, I've got a pretty diverse background in the water space. Everything from building water systems in Honduras to mega infrastructure in New York, and also in two water-related startups. And now I've been working with Greenbacker for the last 2 years, getting their early stage incubation fund off the ground, Greenbacker Labs, that invests in efficiency, water, and renewables, broadly speaking. But we've got a very deep background in sustainable infrastructure. And so, Labs is just a new way of spreading opportunities. So with that, I'll jump into, sort of how we see the water space on the next slide. So this dovetails well with Will's presentation. What we're looking at is data from the U.S. Geological Survey, and this is data they put out every 5 years from the National Water Report showing water withdrawals. And what you'll notice is the yellow lines, which are the tallest, is water withdrawn for thermoelectric power. That's water that's used to cool fossil fuel power plants, followed by irrigation used for the agricultural sector, and then the purple lines for public supply. And so when we think about, what are the markets for water investment opportunities, it's really following these trends. And essentially what we want to do is we want to lower the yellow lines, we want to lower the green lines, and we want to lower the purple lines. And in doing that, we're able to, not only save water, but create meaningful business opportunities. So go to the next slide. So I want to talk just generally about, these three sectors in power, irrigation, and public supply. Oftentimes the water opportunities are not in water themselves, but tangentially related to water. We'll mention the water energy nexus, and power is a big consumer of water. Fossil fuel power plants consume somewhere between 300 and 1,000 gallons of water per megawatt hour. So, for every megawatt hour of solar and wind that you put out on the grid, you're actually reducing the amount of water that's being withdrawn. And there's obviously other water opportunities in micro hydro and inline hydro. There's unique parts of the country that are very wet, that have small megawatt power stations on rivers that could be rehabilitated, and there's a lot of investment opportunities there. On the flip side, looking at consumers of water, for example, or consumers of energy, buildings create a large opportunity for energy efficiency, which indirectly reduces the amount of water being consumed. Buildings consume somewhere around 40% of energy in the U.S. And also account for about 40% of emissions. So there's a big opportunity with motors. Efficient motors also play into the utility space, where, for example, blowers used in the aeration process are a huge consumer of power. So anything you can do to reduce power consumption and get renewables on the grid is going to have lasting impact on the water space. Looking at the agricultural sector for a second, vertical farming, I think, is big. It's not just about growing microgreens anymore. There's opportunities to grow berries and other high value produce, basically anything on a vine. And vertical farming is great. It uses 90% less water. There's also, it becomes a real estate opportunity when you think about, real estate needs are changing, and also as relates to the pandemic. But there's an opportunity to bring agricultural production close to cities in some cases for certain products. And so I think there's an opportunity to combine, sort of this vertical farming expertise with real estate expertise and create opportunities there. Drip irrigation is another one that reduces water consumption. And then there's additional opportunities for brackish water reclamation and different types of water purchase agreements that I think will become big as the future, as we move into the future, as water becomes more scarce. As you look over at the public supply side of things, water is the fastest growing utility rate, and so that sort of dovetails well with the cost that farmers are paying for water. But regular consumers, whether it's single and multifamily tenants, are paying a lot for water, as are commercial and industrial users. The price of water is going up about 3 to 10% per year, depending upon where you live. The American Water Works had a study pre-pandemic that over the next decade, something like 30% of people may not be able to afford their water in the future. So to the extent that we can get real-time water quality and consumption technology into the market, it's hugely beneficial. From a quality perspective, one person tests their water, but how do you sort of bring a community of test results together to compare that to what the utility is sharing, and at the same time, how do you track your consumption in real time and so forth to look for leaks? We'll mention some of the companies, conservation labs, Flow, and so forth, that have different technologies. We've worked with some other folks in the water efficiency space. They're doing a lot in the real estate space, where water is a huge driver on the P&L for a multifamily building, and companies are able to go into a building. They can save 15 to 30% on water costs, and there's a shared savings model with the building owner, and that has the downstream benefit of increasing the net operating income for the property. So there's a knock-on effect. Water damage is also a big issue. It's the largest claim that insurance companies pay out. Whether it's water damage to a property, it's flood insurance, and so forth. And so, structuring businesses that are helping to reduce flood risks and damages as a result of water are going to be huge. Looking ahead, I think there's a lot of opportunity around replacing lead service lines. A single lead service line may only cost $3,000, $5,000, something in that realm to replace, but it may not be something that homeowners have the money for, and utilities don't have the money for. And so, how do you structure different types of project finance programs or use PACE financing to leverage some of these opportunities? I think there's also new opportunities for new business models in water. As we've talked about, water is severely underpriced, and part of that, we're pricing by gallon or by 100 cubic feet, which is difficult for people to understand and doesn't necessarily capture the value of water. But I think there's an opportunity to, in some cases, perhaps price water based on how it's used or the number of times the toilets flush, which is a crazy idea to put out there. But it helps people understand how water is used and also creates new ways to pay for it. And tangential to that, I think for utilities, there's going to be a big push toward modularity. I think one of the challenges of rehabilitating water infrastructure in the U.S. is that it's been so custom built for a particular locality. And if you sort of think about it like cars, for example, a Honda doesn't build a custom car for every single person. They build, a couple models, and then you just move the seat back and forth depending upon, what suits you. And so I think, there's a variety of companies out there that are deploying modular technology, and I think that becomes a way to not only standardize, but to scale deployment of technology faster into the utility ecosystem. And then the last point is about atmospheric water generation. There's a number of companies out there, more coming, that are developing different types of atmospheric water generation, which can plug into solar arrays and use solar power to generate, or could just be home units that fit on your countertop like a coffee maker. So there's a number of developments in these sectors which are quite interesting. So go on to the next slide. Okay, I have one more slide I wanted to cover, if possible. There we go. So one of the challenges in the water space is, what do the returns look like? And this is a graph that you see in a lot of investment funds. Obviously when you invest earlier on, there's a lot more risk. It takes a longer time to get your money back. I think in the water space, and tangentially in the agricultural and power space, you've got. I think there's really two things happening. One is I think there's going to be a lot more acquisitions than there are IPOs. We mentioned Xylem at the beginning of the call. Buying up companies. I think that will happen with a lot of other companies just because they have a certain amount of size. But there is also a lot of different project finance opportunities. And when you pair project finance with working capital for these companies, it helps the companies grow. It helps them. It helps kind of diversify the return portfolio. And I think what a lot of these companies need, especially ones that are putting out large scale assets, they need some type of project finance dollars to be able to grow rapidly, because trying to grow the business with equity dollars is just very, very expensive. And so project finance creates additional opportunities. So that was a very high level, quick overview of how we see the water space. And I think the takeaway is really that the water opportunities often are not in water per se, but they're in industries tangential to water that rely heavily on water. And when you can reduce water costs and the pain points associated with water, they can become very, very profitable.
Thanks, Eli. Could I just ask one question? I mean, when you think about earning a financial return as an investor, do you feel like you're making a market return in this industry?
Yeah, the returns differ. When you make a venture return, it's obviously a higher multiple, and when you get into the project finance, that return could be in the mid to low teens, and it just depends on the type of projects and the type of companies.
And Duncan, we're going to have a Q&A at the end, so just let everyone know.
Should we transition to the next panelist?
Sounds good. I believe that's Judd Hill, right?
That's indeed correct.
So I've known Judd since the late 2000s. He was a partner with a interesting energy group down in Dallas called MGP Energy, which was one of our managers, and so he's basically had experience in both the energy sector, but more importantly at NGP, he helped launch what was then known as the Global Adaptation Fund, which was sort of ahead of its time with respect to addressing environmental issues and water issues and coastal issues, climate change, and that kind of thing. So he's overarching experience from water rights, where he was with Summit Partners, one of the early movers in the water rights space, to wetlands mitigation, which is his current area of focus, and sort of everything in between. So he's a financier, an engineer, and we also discovered that he's also an educator. So he's been a visiting professor at American University down in D.C. So kind of a Renaissance man here today, and I'll turn it over to Judd to take us through his perspective on the world.
Thank you, Turner. A generous introduction. You know, it's interesting just hearing the earlier remarks, and we talk about, the water crisis. Years, right into grad school, 1979, started a de novo wastewater company for Atlantic Richfield, believe it or not. And we pioneered back then, 40 years ago, what is now considered, wastewater recycling, taking domestic wastewater, cleaning it up sufficiently to put it on golf courses and common areas, etc. And we actually pioneered purple pipe, which is, pipe you see along the roads where they're actually, bringing that wastewater, back to a golf course or whatever. And that was my first right into grad school. And we took that company from basically a good idea to about 40 million in revenue and about, $18 bucks at EBITDA, thereabouts. And I didn't even know what EBITDA was back then. But a great business. My first exposure to the water sector. And it's just been a continuum ever since. I always say when I teach at American University, I went to the Yogi Berra School of Career Management. And when it come to the fork in the road, I took it. After Atlantic Richfield, I helped Westinghouse start an environmental business, and we did all kind of things in water and wastewater, and even pioneered immunoassays for water detection. Back in the days of hot chemical for all the older water folks. And then I went on to actually start a de novo environmental company, which I took public. I guess that had been in the early 90s, and I used HSBC as one of my bankers. And mid-career, of all things, I became an investment banker, and I joined HSBC to head up a water practice back in the early 90s. And back in those days, the roll-ups were just beginning. It was a company called U.S. Filter. Many of you may know. A guy named Dick Heckman. He was kind of the first guy to roll up the water sector. Started with $50 million and ultimately monetized out through Vivendi, now Veolia, for about $6.5 billion. So as a banker, we did pipe secondaries, converts, M&As, the whole litany of things. But those were the heydays, if you will, of the water and wastewater sector. I mean, it's been robust ever since then. And then after being a banker for a couple of years, I joined Texas Pacific Group. They were just starting a water fund back then called Aqua International Partners, and we invested about $300 million around the globe with an OPIC levered fund. We did bottled water in Tajikistan, drip irrigation in India, tanks in Mexico. So again, seeing all different facets of the ebbing and the flowing of water and wastewater. Probably spent another 10 or so years with TPG, and then I actually left there and helped start a water rights business, kind of John Dickerson. And we also had a long-only hedge fund that invested only in water equities, which is pretty novel back then, which did very well, for its class sector back then. And that was really some of the early years in the water rights sector. I'll give you an example in a minute of how water rights was not only a sustainable investment, but also very good return for our investors. But after that, as Turner suggested, I joined Natural Gas Partners, which is a large middle market private equity shop. And we started what was called Global Environmental, Global Adaptation Partners, and to invest at the nexus of water, ag, energy, and coastal protection, which is really a pretty novel set of verticals, and to have deep domain expertise on all four of those legs. And we went out to raise about $1 billion and made that part of NGP. And one of the things we invested in was the water rights space, having just come from that sector with some global water. And an example was out in Arizona, we would find ag land and we'd pay ag prices, and we'd only buy ag land that had what's called very senior water. And in the water rights business, it's first in use, first in right. And so we only bought land that had very senior water, 1860, 1870 kind of allocation. So if there's a carve back in the water from the Colorado River, we always had our water rights. And most farmers still do it today. They use way too much water. They waste it. They actually have, most of their fertilizers, go off the farm into the receiving stream because eutrophication and algal blooms and fish kills, and usually they don't do a good job of kind of managing the land because water is almost a free good. You can use 3 acre feet of water per acre of land, and you really only need about a third of that. And so our strategy was to go buy numerous farms. We probably deployed about, 50 or 60 million bucks, not that much. And we bought the land. We actually went and laser leveled it and used drip and micro irrigation, and we tried to farm with about a third of the water, which we were allocated to legally use. And the other 2/3 of the water, which we had the right to use, we were going to act as a water bank for local community in Arizona, because in Arizona it's not location. It's water. And so in that strategy, we were hoping we could get good yields by using 1/3 the water. And ironically, we found out that our yields went up because the plants weren't standing in too much water, and we used about 1/3 the fertilizer because we only applied the fertilizer when we needed to, and eutrophication and runoff dropped. So our cost of goods dropped probably 15%. Our yields went up 15%, and we were very efficient farmers. But more importantly, 2/3 of that water we kept, and that became a long-term annuity where we could serve as a water bank for local community, and we were the best stewards of the water, clearly, because in many cases the local communities would own the water, and the mayor would be told by his geologist, hey boss, we better quit pumping this aquifer because if we pump it too hard, it's going to collapse. We're going to have saltwater, intrusion. And he goes, crap, I don't lose my job. Keep pumping. We're in those situations. If we own that aquifer and own those water rights, we care about the next 100 years, not the next 4 years. So we were very good stewards of the water asset. And in that situation, $50 million and turned out to about $150 million, made 3 times our money. So we were good stewards of the water asset. We were, sustainable for sure, and we were very efficient farmers. That's I think one of a great example of top decile returns in the water space. And after Carlisle came in and bought NGP's management co, and I left and started my own fund, and which is this business you see here. It's called ecological service partners. And one of the sectors, this is a very interesting part of the water space, where under Section 404 of the Clean Water Act, if you are a impacting party, say you're building a big LNG plant or expanding a port or building roads and bridges, i.e. a big deal for this new infrastructure rollout, hopefully, that Biden will put forward. But you can't do anything unless you deal with Section 404, which is basically dealing with the impacts you have on jurisdictional wetlands. And so the way the business works is, if you're going to build a $2 billion LNG plant, you're going to take out 500 acres of jurisdictional wetland. You're required to go mitigate that impact. And the way the law is structured, you have to go buy credits that the Corps of Engineers runs. And those credits are created by guys like us. We're in that same watershed. We'll go find an impacted watershed or wetland, either because it's land subsidence or poor ag practice, but we could actually restore the wetland to its original pristine condition. And by doing that, we get what's called a biological lift. And the Corps would then give us credits for restoring that wetland to its original condition. And those credits would go onto a ledger, and the impacting parties would come to us in a private-to-private transaction and buy credits from us to offset their impact. And it's a great business because, price is the third or fourth thing that the customer thinks about. He cares about quality. He cares about our balance sheet. He cares about are our credits going to be delivered on schedule and budget for him. And the last thing he asks about, what's the price? Because you can't turn a shovel of dirt over and build this $2 billion LNG plant until you solve this problem. And it takes a lot of domain expertise. My part guy that really knows how to manage the regulatory process with, the Department of Interior, EPA, Fish and Wildlife, Corps of Engineers, all the local folks. So it's a very permitting intensive business, but extremely profitable business. And when we're done, we actually create a wetland and we put on a 50 to 100 year conservation servitude on it. So it's never touched again. And it becomes, a functional wetland, so it helps the environment. Particularly in terms of hurricanes down Louisiana and Texas. If you look at the next slide, if they could move it one more. Yeah, before I get to the example, classically what we'll do is we'll try to find 5,000 or 10,000 acres that have suffered from subsidence, and we can bring in dredge from the Mississippi or some other navigable waterway, and use that dredge to bring up the floor of that particular wetland, so the sunlight can then reach the bottom and we can restore the wetland. So we actually can get paid for the beneficial dredge, and then we will restore the wetland. And then get credits, from the Corps, and then we'll maintain this bank for probably 5-6 years, and then release it back into give it to Ducks Unlimited or whomever, and make a very functional wetland. And we make great returns. We had about $500 million allocated to us from Elliott, which we didn't need all of it, and we recently restructured from equity to debt. But if you look at the next slide, I'll give you a good example how we can make extremely attractive returns in this space by really understanding the regulations and the process and the methodologies of what it takes to get these permits. We found a busted permit that was in the regulatory purgatory for probably 6-7 years. Come in and we bought an option from the owners of that mitigation bank for $50K, and see if we can get it unstuck. And in that example, within a matter of a year, we took about $250,000 of investment and made about 6.2 times, $6.5 million on our first credit sale, 25 times our money, and we probably have another $20 million of credits to be sold from that same bank. So it's a rather arcane space, but very, very attractive on a returns basis.
That's great, Judd. That's really interesting. I mean, you've got kind of a soup to nuts perspective on the water space. I think we'll probably want to come back to that in the Q&A. But I'm going to pass it over to Leslie, and she'll tee up our final performer here.
Perfect. Great. Thank you, Turner and Judd. I am so happy to gather with all of you. It's my pleasure to introduce John Robinson as our next speaker. We met after our first panel, which was hosted by 361 November 17th. We share the discussions around health and wellness and the interconnected aspects of how water plays so deeply into these discussions. And he is willing to co-learn along with us. And we share Denison University as our alma mater. He also has his master's in advanced international relations from Johns Hopkins. He's action-oriented. He's an innovative entrepreneur, and he focuses on accelerating technologies to market that will enable water efficiency. He essentially operates the intersection of technology, venture investing, water, and wastewater. With more than 13 years in this space, both domestically and internationally, he has experience in most end user markets, with a particularly strong focus on data science related innovation. The investment group that he co-founded is called Mazarin Ventures, headquartered in Chicago, which operates in-house incubator, seed stage, and early growth stage funds. All of this work is focused on hardware and software innovations that address water and wastewater risk in a framework that he'll discuss of agriculture, buildings, industry, and utility. With aspirations well beyond just the simple commercial opportunities, John is passionate about water quality and public health, the social impact, water quantity and climate change, the environmental impact. And with that, John, thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Leslie. Nice to meet everybody. I'm going to go quickly through my remarks. If you could go to my first slide. I'm not here to talk about my resume and my background for 15 minutes. I'm here to share. So the first thing I want to share is our worldview. This is how we see water, and I put that in quotes. So starting in the upper left-hand corner, real estate. I mean, it's a great place to start in water. We all understand real estate, but real estate and water have an antagonistic relationship. I mean, leak challenge is one thing, but you've got hot water problems, you got filtration problems. Sarni touched on this a little bit. Fire suppression systems, sprinklers, that's water tech. Water appliances like dishwasher, washing machines, pools, lawn and garden, sprinklers. If you're a building owner, an operator, or occupier, I mean, it's all about innovations that de-risk. It's really asset management technologies. And so we don't even think of it in terms of water. We think of it in terms of prop tech. And when we wake up in the morning, we're getting prop tech email newsletters. We're going to prop tech conferences. It's the first and most interesting opportunity in water because it's the global market of buildings is just huge, single family, multi-tenant, schools, universities, and there's just a whole ecosystem of technologies that solve problems for real estate. The second one, I'm going to go counterclockwise here a little bit. Agriculture, single biggest user. I'm not going to belabor that point, but farmers and stakeholders in farms are looking for innovations to deliver efficiencies. Now, irrigation is an obvious play. One other area that we're getting into is climate tech. How much precipitation is going to fall on this piece of real estate in the next 3 to 5 years. So that's not really the water industry. That's more how much rain or snow is going to fall, and which is water. But we think of it more as climate tech and ag tech. Right in the middle there, energy and industry. Some of the other speakers have touched on this. You cannot get far in water without touching energy. In fact, I would consider Mazarin more in the just as much in the energy space as we are in the water space. Water, energy, thermoelectric power is a huge user of water. And then if you go to wastewater treatment plants, desalination, the whole business of desal is just a water headache. And wastewater treatment plants are nothing but energy. So we kind of call it water G. Bottom right corner, this is sort of where you have your utilities. We don't think of them as utilities. You can't make money in utilities. Public health and safety. You say public health and safety, people reach for their checkbooks. There was a fire, there was a shooting, there was a water main break. That sounds like something we need to get on top of. You say water, people's eyes glaze over. Fintech. I mean, this might be surprising for some people on the call. Like, what the heck does fintech have to do with water? Turns out a lot. The finance, insurance, and real estate industry, which we call the FIRE sector, F-I-R-E. One of the biggest concerns over the next decade is water-related risks. Too much water, water, too little water, compromised water. One of the companies we invested in, Aquaoso, 90% of their customers are banks. They're not in the water business, they're in the fintech business. Banks who are lending money to farmers are worried about water security. And last but certainly not least, health and wellness. The filter that's under the sink, the Brita thing that's in your pitcher, that's the whole home system, those aren't really water tech. You say water tech, you're not going to make any money. Hence the comment right there. Nobody makes money in water. You make money in health tech. I just poured some water in this glass right here. That has nothing to do with water. That's all about health for me, and I will pay a premium for health. So if you this is sort of a framework. When we wake up in the morning, this is how we're thinking about water. Other people are entitled to their own worldview, but if you look at through these lenses, you see dollar signs. Next slide, please. So where's the smart money in all this? Data science, efficiencies to effectively manage water risk, right there. Digital twinning, that's software to enable owners and operators of equipment to scenario things out, model things in the cloud before they mess with things physically. To the right there, predictive analytics, some of the other speakers have touched on this. AI and machine learning are impacting ag and buildings and utilities just the way they are in other industries. IoT SaaS is kind of interesting that the cost of sensors is so cheap now that it's enabling subscription and enabling SaaS offerings to enter into any applications where water is applicable. One area that we're digging into is big data. So you've got all this messy, dirty data, and dirty data is the technical term for a lot of these big data sets. It's kind of useless to AI if it's got problems. So we're looking at some data validation software that enables AI to work a lot better. It's kind of pre-treatment for your AI. So that technology isn't really water tech. It's just straight up data science tools and software that create efficiencies within water. Bottom right corner, we call it SSDI, satellite data source data and insights. We're not investing in satellites, but the data coming off the satellite into the cloud down to AI, what you do with that data is one of the more exciting opportunities in water over the next decade. Metagenomics, this is DNA, RNA technologies. We put some money to work in this space. That gets straight into water quality. What's living in the water is a huge area of opportunity, and metagenomics potentially can help human society and industry get out ahead of water quality challenges. Last but certainly not least, for some of you on the phone, you might be familiar with SCADA. It's a legacy technology that's been around for a long time, and most utilities and industrial users are using it to manage operations relating to water and wastewater, including other things too. We see a different future. We see a future where mobile apps will enable owners and operators of water and wastewater assets to be able to get out in front of some of their assets. SCADA is going to be around a long time, and SCADA certainly has its role, but apps are coming in hot and fast. And I'm not talking dating apps or food delivery apps. I'm talking about mobile-based tools, subscription-based, that enable an owner and operator to get visibility and control over their pumping stations, the treatment, or pressure, or quality, or some aspect of water right on their phone. So that's a really exciting area. So this is where we're putting money in the next few years, and we're happy to syndicate with other investors who are keen to get more into data science. Next slide, please. So, we wake up in the morning as business people, we're investors, but we go to bed at night genuinely concerned about social and environmental problems around the world. These logos here represent the 11 companies we've invested in our Fund 1. Each of them has a social and environmental generating play, public health and safety, conservation, disaster, and reducing greenhouse gas emissions. A lot of these guys would not even consider themselves in the water business. They're generating value in so many other ways, but we're very keen on creating social and environmental impact. Now, do these companies have commercial related aspirations and customers? Of course they do, but it's possible to do well and do good. And there's a little note in the corner there. We welcome syndication with other investors who have like-minded worldviews, and we're happy to bring investors into the deals that we look at. And our Fund 2, it says there at the bottom, is entirely focused on SaaS, and we launched that recently, and we're happy to talk software with other people. Next slide, please. I think this is my last one. In summary, I know this sounds contrarian right there at the top. No one makes money in water. We agree. You don't make money in water. And I know people on the phone are shaking their heads, but like in our humble opinion, you make money in prop tech, you make money in energy, you make money in ag, you make money in health, and you make money in public health and safety. I know that seems contrarian as hell, but that's just how we wake up in the morning. We've heard ad nauseum people, you can't make money in water, the rates, we're energy guys, we looked at water, can't make money. We think that's BS. We think there's plenty of opportunity. You just got to look at it the right way. Number two, smart money is in data science tools that are mitigating risk. I mean, this whole water problems is like risk everywhere. And risk is reality for people, whether you're a single family home or a company or a utility. People pay premiums to mitigate risk or eliminate risk. Last but not least, invest with intentionality. The water is a major risk for health, and we wake up in the morning and we want to do our best to contribute to societal and industrial water and wastewater headaches. So with that, happy to have this opportunity to share our worldview, and happy to discuss any questions people have.
Love it, John. Great passion, great perspective. Thanks for doing that. Now what I want to do is just kind of open it up to the group. And I assume the group will have, a lot of perspective and questions that they want to throw to the panel, or the panel can toss out some questions. You can either just, speak out, or you can submit questions on chat, whatever you guys are most comfortable with.
Well, I have a question. And the first speaker, William, I'm curious, for the acquisitions that are going on, and also just in venture in general, what kind of, in the water space, what kind of valuations are you seeing, and what kind of valuations are companies being acquired at? Are they, have they reached the inflated numbers like fintech companies, or are they still muted?
Yeah, it varies a bit. There's not a lot that's out there publicly. There's definitely some inflation going on. John touched on data analytics. So you're seeing companies in the data space getting a premium. I think treatment technology companies are not doing as well. But the hot topic right now is digital. However you want to frame it, So happy to have a side conversation with you on that, and I can tell you what I know. But there's a little bit of inflation going on, in particular as it relates to data acquisition and analytics. And there was a company recently acquired by Danaher as part of their Hawk business. I don't know what the acquisition price was, but I'm willing to bet that they got a pretty good premium. It's Aquatic Informatics.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
I have kind of got a question. Go ahead. No, you go ahead, Leslie.
There's been a lot of discussion about the tension around water rights and uses in constrained areas in places such as the Southwest of the U.S. Ag land versus development, water rights of Native Americans, et cetera, which are political hot potatoes. Do you think that compromise can be achieved? Will, you want to give that a shot?
Well, I'm not sure what compromise means. Look, I live in Colorado. Investors are coming in and buying ag land. It's called buy and dry, basically. So, yeah, it's, water's at a premium. It's going to fuel urban growth. Ag is tough business to be in. For me, this is going to be a public policy issue. So, how does a state, how does a region manage a common pool resource such as water, and start making better economic decisions around water, as opposed to really sort of a free-for-all right now. So Yeah, Leslie, I don't know if it's a compromise or not. I just think that, there's going to be a lot of pull from different sectors, investors, but also the ag sector, which is incredibly powerful in places like the American West and the Midwest.
Yeah, if I could add to that, as we all know, the water rights business has been around for, hundreds of years, and people debate about, as they say, whiskey's for drinking and water's for fighting. And it's been going on for a long time. And I do believe that there are, opportunities where you can be a good steward of the water asset, like the one I explained. And it's helpful for the ag business and for the environment. And also it helps the local community, deal with access to clean water for expansion. Because as many of you know, you cannot get a building permit in parts of the West unless you have a 100-year assured water supply. And it's hard to find and it's expensive.
Just building on that comment, we're very focused on the price of water. We really need to look at the economic value of water, and the social value of water to start making better public policy decisions. So, really until that happens, it's going to be this tug of war. And I think actually California's done better than they have historically in terms of passing things like the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act that is a fuel for companies like Aquaoso that John mentioned. So innovation happens slowly in the public sector, but it's got to happen for us to make better decisions on how we use that gallon or liter of water.
We got a question in the chat that I'll touch on. The questions around the area of PFAS mitigation, PFAS.
I can handle that one. I can handle that.
So have you seen the chat question, John?
Yeah,
go ahead, John.
Just what?
So the question is: Are any of you looking at that in terms of investing? And what's kind of the emerging? Is it an emerging risk or an opportunity relative to kind of an investment?
Both. We looked at that space a lot. It's not going anywhere. PFAS is around. It's been with us a long time, so it's an opportunity. But when you look at it in terms of diagnostics detection, do I have PFAS in my water? How much PFAS? Where is the PFAS? What kind of PFAS? And then destroying it. We segmented it into those two buckets, DX and RX. The RX side will not be an investment opportunity until the shoe drops from the federal government, which we don't think will happen anytime soon. I hope I'm wrong. But even Biden administration takes years to get regulation to go in on PFAS. So it is a problem. It's in our water supply. So we think the only way to play it in the near term is diagnostics. Do I have it? What kind do I have? And how much? Communities will still be, and corporates will still be concerned about that, and they will be pulling for tools that enable them better visibility into PFAS and then therefore control. Destruction, it's a 5 to 10 year thing, in our opinion.
Anybody anything to add on that?
Well, that's good for the bottled water companies.
Right. But I could add to that too. I think... I'm sorry. I was just going to make the point too, but as many of you know, a point of entry and point of use, treatment solutions, and to have a point of use at the tap, takes out PFAS and other things. When we have issues, like we had in Flint, Michigan, I think for those efficient technologies that work, I think we're going to continue to see those proliferate and make good margins in the point of use and point of entry space.
Yeah, and I was just going to tag onto that. I think there's big opportunities in modular treatment where, either in the home, in the building, at the treatment plant level, where you can just, plug and play different treatment technologies together as risks evolve, as we learn more about different contaminants.
Yeah, but just pulling PFAS out in a filter doesn't destroy it. It just moves from your house to another location. So it doesn't solve the problem.
But you don't drink it. That's the important thing. You don't keep drink it. Consuming it. You can manage it. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a growing.
It's health.
There's a growing demand and concern for PFAS, and the innovative-looking municipalities and some of the other companies out there are looking at destruction technologies, and there are some that are actually looking.
Of course, they're looking. We're not questioning that people aren't looking. We've looked at 25 deals in the space. They're looking. The question is, will you make money in destruction in the next few years? Yeah, filtration maybe is a way to play it.
I think you're going to make money in alternative hydration because people will not trust their tap water. And we're there right now. So, again, look at the companies that are showing up that are delivering alternative hydration solutions.
I agree.
And also,
I think reinvention of the drinking fountain.
Yeah,
and the drinking fountain guys are asleep at the wheel.
Yeah,
sorry, I'm not going to name names, but they're asleep at the wheel of the drinking fountain.
The fountain's dead. It was dying pre-pandemic. Right. Who's going to put their mouth on a water fountain now?
Well, yeah, I think, too, that you look at every drop of water that enters our house, we can consume. And we only consume probably 2 or 3% of that in cooking or drinking. And yet we treat it as though we're going to consume it all. And one could argue, should we have, black pipe, blue pipe, et cetera? And, if you have greenfield opportunities to do that and the price of water goes up, because as we know now, water is almost a free good. It's just too cheap.
Right. So a question that was posed, another question that was posed that I kind of want to add to before you guys respond is the question is on the role innovation hubs play in fostering water innovation. But I'm wondering, is there truly enough? I mean, this has been an issue, you guys know, much longer than any of us even realize. Water scarcity, water quality, water mitigation. But is there enough investment, enough innovation, enough activity in the public and private sector to really address what are glaring kind of water issues around the globe? When right now, consumer behavior doesn't seem to change.
I don't think so. I think the water space is sort of 15, 20 years behind where the energy efficiency space is. I mean, you see people, doing things now that the energy space did 15, 20 years ago. And I think it's just education, people seeing the problems. I mean, Flint was a wake-up call. And you're seeing attitudes change. People are paying more attention to it.
But Flint was therefore investing more. Electricity quality problems. Electricity is
right, but it's an event that people notice.
Wait, got to jump in.
Go ahead.
Flint was a public policy failure.
Correct.
It was not a technology failure. So, exactly. If you think about who needs to weigh in and solve water, it's the public sector and its entrepreneurs and everybody in between. So, Flint scared the heck out of everybody because Flint is not an isolated case. Mm-hmm. 20, 30 million people are exposed to lead in their drinking water pipes. So,
But it is price. I mean, I use the analogy when I teach kids at AU. I said, where did WTI close at today? Oh, $50, $45, and a barrel of oil is 40 gallons, right? And I'll say, well, where did water close at today? Oh, well, water's not a traded commodity. I go, okay, let's use an example. Go up to your tap, take that 40-gallon container, turn it on, and fill it up. What'd you pay for that 40 gallons?
Right.
Oh, 50 cents? $1? No. How about 2 cents? It's a free good. People don't care.
Except bottled water. Look at what people will pay.
Correct.
For branded bottled water. And that's where you're seeing the whole hydration sector go.
Well, that was the first volley into the concept of people paying for water. But just on those lines, when we were setting up for this, John, I think you made a comment about where can we save water. And you were talking about the technologies could save 30% of our water. And then I think you talked about Bed Bath & Beyond and then a cheeseburger. I mean, on the topic of education, do you want to share that with everybody?
Yeah, as individuals, me included, our biggest water use every week is not drinking water and flushing toilets and taking showers. It's our diet and our energy and our consumption of cotton goods. I mean, every time you go buy a cotton shirt or a new set of sheets on your bed, it's thousands of gallons of water. Cheeseburgers, 800 gallons, whatever. I mean, even a cup of coffee is like a gallon of water, and that's water that was dumped onto the bean. So turning off the lights and becoming vegetarian ends up becoming a way to save water more than just taking a shorter shower, honey. Become a vegetarian and turn off the electricity. That's how you really get big wedges out of your water footprint. So so in terms of education of that and the price of water, I mean, I don't know, getting back to Eli, comparing water to the electric utility is not a helpful comparison. Sorry to say that, Eli, I love you, but like everyone always trots that one on 15, maybe 20 years behind, maybe 20 years. The other one that people always trot out is, well, until water's priced right, you're never going to make money at it. They trot these things out all the time, and they're just like a small puzzle piece in a bigger puzzle. Water is so much more than that. I mean, if you have a leak on the 17th floor, that has nothing to do with water price, and that has nothing to do with it. That's just like asset damage. And so there's just all these other wedges of water that go way beyond just pricing. That's my point of view.
Yeah, the point isn't making the comparison, John. The point is people just being aware of water. You talk to most people, they don't know where their water comes from and where their water goes.
And they probably never will.
No.
We won't.
So, Eli, I'm going to side with you. There are lessons to be learned from the energy sector, in particular as it relates to digital. So, it's not one for one because, water's not fungible. It's a local issue. It has a number of different dimensions to it. But in terms of lessons learned, microgrids for water, absolutely. They're more sustainable, they're more resilient, things like that. So I sound like I'm sort of in the middle of this argument here, but there are lessons to be learned from other sectors, in particular if you look at digital, if you look at localized off-grid solutions.
Yeah, and the other thing I'd say, you look at water efficiency. I mean, while people are doing water efficiency in energy efficiency in commercial buildings, now they've switched over to doing energy efficiency, and you've got water purchase agreements and, shared savings. It's the same thing. People are just applying the same business models.
Right. Water as a service. You brought that up, I believe. Okay, you guys are good now? You're not?
I love John.
Okay, good. All right.
I was going to ask a question of you relative to your work with AB InBev, and so I've kind of watched with interest some of these consumer packaged goods companies migrating into the closed loop economy and addressing some of these issues and actually putting their money where their mouth is. And so maybe you can comment a little bit on what you've seen there and whether you think it's a trend that's kind of here to stay.
Yeah, so I focused on the sustainability and corporate water strategy for roughly 20 years. Enormous progress has been made. However, some of it ranges from, corporate social responsibility, check the box, I'm really not doing anything, but I got a good story to tell, to companies that actually recognize that water and other related issues are a fundamental business risk, and they have staff, they have funding, they're driving innovation, they're LPs and investment funds. And I put AB InBev in there. Historically, Coca-Cola's been in that category. But in my view, AB InBev is the leader because they have a water stewardship program where they invest in their supply chain. They identify innovative technologies in various categories, such as climate change and water. And then they scale those technologies. They actually pilot them and mentor them and get them to a reasonable scale because they can deploy globally. So, it depends who it is, but companies are beginning to recognize that if they don't have water, they don't have a business. They just don't, and that includes companies like, Intel and Microsoft. So happy to continue that conversation, Turner.
But you're right, though. I mean, one thought of that, too, is, as you guys well know, if you're building a new chip plant out west, right, I mean, the first thing they think about is, where's the water going to come from? And we're going to have it? And is it an assured supply? And it's critical.
Yeah. And, Intel does some really interesting, innovative things around engaging with the public sector, groundwater recharge, incredibly progressive. And Microsoft is sort of moving along in that direction also, mostly I'd say on the investment side through their, AI for Earth program, their $1 billion climate fund, being an LP in Emerald with Ecolab. So, yeah, I think it's a good place to look.
You can't conduct business if you don't have access to water, right?
Well,
Right.
You're not making anything.
This is a good segue, Tom, into Duncan's question before about education. A lot of people are always water crisis and water's everything, water crisis. We advise people, if investors or anybody who wants to get their heads around the space, the highest level cut is quantity and quality. Pick one and go solve it. The quantity issues are mostly climate related, although quantity in a building like leaks is not climate related necessarily, but there's a whole world of problems in quantity. We're talking about that with semiconductor plants. The quality issue, as Sarni pointed to, is more of a, they're all public policy, but like the lead in the pipes that's a public policy issue that doesn't have too much to do with climate. Flint had nothing to do with climate. And so people talk about water problems. What they should really parse it out is water quantity problems and go down that road, and water quality problems. Pick one, own it, and put some money to work. And then you'll keep your sanity, because just talking water is too broad.
Yeah.
I agree with that. I mean, my perspective is, we had 1970 Clean Water Act, right? You have NPDES permits, point discharge. I think we've done a great job in this country managing point source discharge. We've done a horrific job relative to non-point source discharges, which is ag runoff, and farm runoff, et cetera. And the impacts we have on, all our Gulf areas, the Chesapeake, et cetera, is horrific because of all the PN and K, phosphorus nitrogen that's running into those estuaries, because we're doing a lousy job managing non-point source runoff. And it has a huge impact. You're going to pay for it later to get it back out again.
And that goes back to Eli's comment about urban ag, vertical farming, and the power that has in terms of, dramatically shortening a supply chain, being more resilient, and reducing resource use. So,
Will, that whole play of urban agriculture is a real estate play through and through. Yeah, it's water, it's crop. But at the end of the day, you need parts of land to build it in the city, and that's more real estate than it is ag or water.
Well, you draw a circle around a city and look for the areas within 100 miles where you can affordably build these greenhouses. Right.
Yeah, I was on a call with one of my ag managers towards the end of last year, and someone said that vertical farming, they expect 70-80% of those heavily funded ventures to fail, just based on the cost model.
Well, I think it depends on the companies. There's a couple of companies I think that are doing it right. They're trying to license their technology to developers. I think some of the companies are running into trouble because they're trying to simultaneously develop the technology and also be developers and run a farming operation. So, I think you're right. Some will fail and some will succeed depending upon their business model.
I would pose that that's probably a statistic that applies to the water sector in general, in terms of startups, great technology, no business strategy, lousy team, never talk to a customer. John's laughing because he's,
lousy team.
Well, look, if you can mix and match teams, I think we'd have a better shot with startups, but you get what you get, at least initially. So
that's why for these early stage companies, they say they want to raise capital. Yeah, they need human capital. They need to raise human capital, intellectual capital, and social capital. And then the financial stuff's easy. It comes later.
John, I completely agree with you, which goes back to one of the questions in the chat box, which is, what do we think about hubs and accelerators? And, that's part of the problem. I mean, hubs,
we need a lot more.
Well, but we need the people side of the equation. And that hubs and accelerators they can't deliver that at scale. And, I would say that the 100 plus accelerator, they focus on that pretty heavily, as opposed to prize competitions, companies that go through, startup companies that go through 3 or 4 hubs, accelerators,
Talent show.
I'd echo that. I mean, because of the, hundreds or so investments I've made in the water space, my biggest winners have been not a technology pick, it's a management pick. Getting really smart jockeys. I bet on jockeys, not horses.
Any venture company will tell you that. You bet on the management team, right?
Yeah.
Because you'll figure it out.
But everybody says it, and very few do it.
Yeah.
Right. After I left Deloitte, I got involved with a technology company, and what I heard was a startup. The technology will sell itself. We need to have T-shirts with that made on it. It's just, it's nuts. It doesn't sell itself. It's the team.
No.
The other problem we found, because the topic's about hubs and accelerators, is once companies graduate from these accelerators and come off stage, their valuation is, and then it becomes hard for smart money to participate. So it's good that they're raising profile of water and they're making people famous, get on stage, but then the valuations end up becoming inflated, and that doesn't do anybody any service.
It takes really smart guys to do that, and that's not me. I mean, I let someone else be the technology picker. I'd rather be the consolidator, and just right. It's just the beta and trying to pick that next, pick the one out of the 20 that's going to work. I'm not smart enough. I'd rather be the consolidator on the other side.
Yeah, and
Tom, can I ask a question?
Yeah, of course you can.
So I've got $2 billion. We're trying to help families navigate both investments and philanthropies. We talk about public policy. We've decided not to be political so far. But I got $1 billion I need to allocate into water, a part of a multi-billion portfolio, and I want to put $1 billion to solve some issues that public policy and investments of all stages aren't solving. How do I allocate on both sides? Am I putting 50 in the John's Fund and 50?
What are the two sides?
Philanthropies and investments.
See, I would argue that you don't have to differentiate. I don't think you have to draw a bright line between the two, because, I mean, I believe you can make great sustainable investments with have top quartile returns without having to say, this is my philanthropic play. I'm not going to get a great return. Over here, it's going to be my private equity or my alpha beta kind of play. I think there's a lot of ways to make money and still do well by doing good, as we say.
Yeah, I agree with that.
But that's fine. But there's some things aren't getting funded.
I can answer your question. Will, go ahead. And then I've got a specific answer to your question.
I'll go after you because I may want to comment.
And I'll jump in third.
Mine's very short and sweet. So on the philanthropy side, what I would do, and we're just talking hypothetically here, Mark, if I was a wealthy family, wanted to make an impact in water, I would donate $5 million to water quality testing for a neighborhood of the city that is usually underprivileged and under-resourced. They probably have crap water. Donate tests, bring that neighborhood online so that everybody from the mayor on down knows where the water quality is in that city. You shine the spotlight on water quality risk in neighborhoods. That's a philanthropic play. You can donate the tests. You help. On the investment side, I would invest in software that enables, drives efficiencies within industrial water and wastewater. I think that is a smart money play. Philanthropy side, money side, data science, industrial processes, water, allocate that.
So I would not make the distinction. Building on what John said, I would invest in anything that democratizes access to data, actionable information, and direct access to potable water. And the reason I say that is that the public sector moves too slow. So anything that can go around the public sector, think about what Uber did for transportation. I didn't have to wait for the taxi sector to evolve or, the medallion nonsense in New York. I got a smartphone app, and you're seeing those technologies show up that can deliver actionable information to people in their homes and can also deliver off-grid water through air moisture capture. So for me, that's the big play. That's the lever.
Okay, can I just, I've been following the conversation, sorry.
BJ, just let
BJ, go ahead, BJ.
Sorry.
Just hold your thought. You got, Eli, I wanted you to make sure you got
I was just going to say real quick, I would say on the investment side, I think they're, both the philanthropic and the investment side is kind of, one and the same in some ways, but I would say splitting the investment between venture and project finance, just because, part of on the project finance side, you're just getting projects out there, you're getting projects built, to the extent, you're building, whether if it's ag or if it's energy, it all has a positive impact on folks.
All right, VJ, you're up.
VJ.
Okay, I've been following this conversation. It's really good. I'm pretty impressed with what's been said. Just on the international front, from my perspective of working on water aid and water infrastructure in developing countries, from Africa to Asia to even the Middle East, where we're using grey water as means of improving agriculture, turning sewage into water and stuff like that. But one of the main players that we've noticed on the international front is a lot of organizations like private sector in Turkey is getting government-backed funding to go and implement projects on the ground in African countries. The Chinese are coming in with Chinese funding and everything. So what you're seeing on the ground from basic NGOs like Water Aid, putting water pumps in places, to now you're seeing real movements in using what you call in industry grey water or sewage water, and improving water to agricultural fields, but also improving water to households and big industries, as well as looking at the environmental impact of water. A lot of road erosions, land erosions and stuff like that. So that's all been going on. So one of the most interesting one is that governments are coming in back in the private sector. As you'll know, in renewables, have you seen, like, there's a lot of technology sitting in countries that need to be deployed, and the governments have simply walked in and said, right, you go do this, we'll give you a government-backed loan to the government or the private sector to undertake it. So that's just a quick international perspective. And on the philanthropic side, Mark, if you got money to invest, then go for the big foundations.
No, I am the big foundation. I'm saying, what do I want to? Are you saying? So you say sprinkle it?
Sprinkle it. Yeah.
Waterkeeper Alliance. That's a good one.
Anybody want to, kind of reinforce the public sector kind of funding the private sector in other parts of the world? Or?
Yeah. Well, to the point, the last gentleman, I mean, we invested in Jain irrigation in India, 15 years ago or so, and the government, mandated using drip irrigation, and that, if you will, subsidized that whole, business for Jain. And I think India does a great job, I think, better than most countries in managing that asset class than many other countries do. Because you can't farm unless you use drip irrigation or micro irrigation. You can't flood.
They're just slow. I mean, at some point, from an infrastructure standpoint, right, the public sector has to step in and invest a lot of money, right? The problem is, when is that going to happen? How long is it going to take, right? In the meantime, you've kind of got to rely on the innovation and other activities. Is that right?
I don't.
Go ahead. Well, to that point, I now have $1 trillion. I'm the government. How do I allocate that?
Well, I think that's a lousy way to spend. I would not give taxpayers. I would not give the government $1 trillion to invest. I would want the public sector to change policy by having technology companies and multinationals go around and influence public policy. A good example is what happened in California. The ag sector did not have to measure groundwater levels. They were not required to do so. All of a sudden, data came out of the NASA GRACE program that was monitoring groundwater levels on a real-time basis, and you could see the ag sector mining groundwater.
Yep.
To change public policy.
Example.
John, you wanted to say something?
Mark, your question. So here's a hypothetical for everybody. So, and I'll just, we're nearing the top of the hour. If energy was free, imagine that for a second. Imagine we woke up tomorrow morning, headlines, energy free around the world, solar power, for everyone. Humankind, the very first thing we would do and should do is desalinate the shit out of the ocean. Because energy's free. I mean, the big cost of desal is energy. Put huge desal plants in the ocean, pump the water inland, energy's free, pumping's free, and make the desert bloom in Arizona, Africa, India, and the water coming through RO filters, energy's free, so you can just do all day long, every day. And we would partially solve a lot of our water problems. So you solve energy, you solve water.
I totally disagree, but that's for another conversation, John.
Putting it out there for debate.
So just chiming in on the public policies, I don't want to make another comparison to energy, but you've got energy pricing has changed dramatically, especially like in New York, for example, where they set up the VETR program, the value of distributed energy resources. It's incentivized the development of wind and solar. Same thing with the investment tax credit, that's more problematic. But changes to the structure and the mandates around the pricing of water, I think will go a long way.
So one of my
I'll
comments.
give you one simple example in the farming. I'm sorry, I just got a real quick thought. In the farming sector, you could see the government do a tax credit, give you a 5-year accelerated depreciation using drip or micro on your farm. So yes, it's subsidized, but it'll have a huge impact, not only on yields, but, reducing the amount of water that is used for farming because it's free to the farmer. That's the problem. It's free. They don't care.
I guess one of my comments, this has been an incredible morning of education and awareness and direction in technology and business that is, I think, really empowering and exciting. I will say, as a conservation-minded individual, we have to continue to realize, we have our one-to-one influences also. And whether you're talking about PFAS or eliminating plastic bags or decreasing usage of plastic bottles in your consumption, we're individuals. So we can influence the people who are in our family, in our neighborhood, in our community, in our networks. And so I guess in terms of next step dialogue, I'd first just want to say how much I appreciate the opportunity to bring together so much discussion today, because we all are moving forward to, build a sense of hope and inspiration for a healthy planet going forward. Thank you to 361 for providing this gathering. Tom, for all of your moderation, Duncan, Turner, our speakers, so grateful. We have one quick note, which Mike Daly will share with us at this time to conclude.
The only thing I'd like to add before you get there is, look, for the panelists in particular, you've got a group of 75 plus or so in this 360 that are very active in the 361 group. And, this isn't the last time we're going to talk about and deal with water. And you've got a lot of human energy and kind of financial capital that people have interest in putting to work. So we can reach out to you guys in the future, or certainly feel free to reach out to us if you guys need help or, want a sounding board, because, our goal is to really begin to take some action on some of these topics, not just kind of have, really interesting educational sessions.
And on that point, I'm almost I was thinking of a Shark Tank with these guys as the judges on some of those.
I'd love to get into it, Will. I'd love to get into it.
Sounds good.
Sparring partners. I think more debate is always interesting for the audience, as opposed to just PowerPoints and presentations.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Good stuff, guys.
But
really great stuff.
I don't know if anybody is a 49ers fan or a football fan, but this is what we're doing later today. So I want to just bring to your attention, this comes to the philanthropic side, because what 361 Foundation's launch, we're gonna punch above our weight by interconnecting, almost a la fund to fund style, because a lot of our families have foundations, or everybody's giving, like Leslie was mentioning. So this is a great kickoff event. Mike, you want to just say a few words?
Sure. Guys could hang on for an important announcement about this event. This was off the chart, raised the bar for our events. Thanks to Will, Eli, Judd, and John, and Leslie, Tom, Turner, and Duncan for putting it together. Yep. Today, around 5 Eastern, we have our premier charity event with Steve Young and Jerry Rice, NFL Hall of Famers from the San Francisco 49ers. We're going to raise some money for kids in East Palo Alto. They've teamed up to help disadvantaged youth around the country. Today, we get to be involved around 5 o'clock Eastern. I put the link in the chat. The event's going to include a screening of a documentary called In Search of Greatness. Our favorite, Sarah Trubridge, was a consultant on the film, and it's got amazing interviews with Pele, Jerry Rice, and Wayne Gretzky. What made them the greatest? They weren't the biggest, the fastest, or the strongest. You'll have to watch the film to find out. If you can't make it, reach out. We'll get you a chance to see it. If you haven't registered, there's still time to help us. We're 4th and inches from victory, and there's extra raffle tickets available for an autographed helmet by Steve Young and Jerry Rice, NFL Hall of Famers. That's all.
Great. Thank you.
So yeah, if you want, and it's sort of like helping ourselves. We're just trying, the larger and wider, and we can be more effective for all of us.
And I want to thank everybody who's been instrumental in helping to put this together. It's going to be a great event.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. But this was a great event.
Thanks, everyone.
Hey, Will, Judd, John, Eli, thank you so much. You guys are brilliant.
Yeah, I echo that.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks so much.
And Leslie, I love the wetland behind you, Leslie. That's good. I like that.
We'll all be in touch. Enjoy the rest of your day.
All right, guys. See you later.
You guys.
Hopefully we see you at 5. Come join us.
Bye-bye.
Water is life. Yep.